a warm welcome to each of you, whether you are present tonight or listening to tonight's recording at a time that's convenient for you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Sister Maria Pascuzzi, the Director of Spirit Alive, a ministry supported by the Sisters of St. Joseph, Brentwood, New York. We are able to provide these programs thanks to the support of the Sisters of St. Joseph and through your donations. Please allow me to begin, as I always do, with a few announcements. First, all presentations are recorded and within approximately 72 hours after tonight's event will be available on the Spirit Alive YouTube channel. Feel free to listen again and know that if you have a conflict and can't be present for one of our AI webinars or any other program, you can always view the recording. But please be patient, it won't be there tonight or tomorrow morning. If you have questions, please submit them anytime you want throughout the presentation by typing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, our presenter will answer as many questions as possible. And finally, my congregation welcomes any donation you can make to Spirit Alive, no matter the amount. You can find donation instructions online where you registered, and if you're not comfortable with online donations, there are also instructions for sending a check. Tonight, with our presentation entitled Education in the Age of AI, we are brought into another area of intense debate. On the one hand, AI has admittedly revolutionized and personalized education. On the other, there is great concern, as we have heard in a number of the preceding webinars, that it invites cheating, has the potential to erode critical thinking and writing skills, and changes the dynamic between the student and the teacher. The debate leads to a number of questions. For example, how can we take advantage of the potential of AI in the classroom while mitigating its risks? Is it even possible to integrate AI responsibly? Or should we, as some suggest, ban it altogether? What about equity issues if not all students have access to AI? To deal with these and other questions and offer a critical and constructive response from a Catholic perspective, we welcome tonight's guest presenter, Dr. Luis Vera, Associate Professor and the current Chair of the Theology Department at St. Mary's University, Emmitsburg, Maryland. After completing his BA in Religion and Philosophy at the University of Georgia in 2007, Dr. Vera attended Notre Dame University, where he attained a master's degree in theological studies as well as a doctorate specializing in moral theology in 2016. His publications include a number of articles in distinguished journals of ethics and moral theology, as well as various book chapters which focus on his research interest in media and technology, in addition to artificial intelligence and pedagogy. Luis is a member of the AI Research Group for the Center for Digital Culture for the Dicastery on Culture and Education of the Holy See, and he co-chaired the project on education and artificial intelligence. In addition to his expertise on the topic tonight, I am especially happy to welcome Dr. Vera, who is among a growing number of young Latino scholars emerging as vital voices within the Church. These scholars bring fresh perspectives addressing the unique cultural, socioeconomic, and spiritual context of Latino Catholics in the U.S., and they enrich the broader Church. So we welcome you, Dr. Vera, and we're so grateful you could take the time to be with us. We look forward to inspirational insights.
So thank you again, Sister Maria, and thank you to everybody who is joining us tonight. And I want to start especially by thanking any educators who are present. If you're listening to this as a teacher, especially live, that means that you carved out room for this webinar out of your schedule in the middle of a really busy end to your semester. Many of you might feel overworked, underpaid, or maybe frustrated that you can't give your students as much as you would like. Friends, so much of the vocation of the educator is lived out in this tension between, on the one hand, our high ideals and our deep desire to love others, and on the other hand, our struggle to be fruitful with our limited personal and our institutional resources. This will be relevant for my talk a little later, but for now, I just want to begin with a special thanks for all of the teachers making the sacrifice to listen in tonight. Thank you for what you do, and thank you also for making yourselves a more and more active part of this important conversation. On a similar note, I think that our AI moment is challenging the church to remember and to deepen its sense of what its mission to the world is. We are obviously at an important crisis. That crisis comes with new or maybe newly difficult challenges, but it also confronts us with maybe like a new opportunity to evangelize the world. To do that as educators, those of us who are teachers need to reconnect as much as we can with the most important reasons for why we became teachers to begin with. So what are the deepest joys, the hopes, the griefs, the anxieties that carried us into this vocation, or which we sought to see and connect with and cultivate in our students? Before we move any further, I want to invite you, any listener, either for yourself as a teacher or on behalf of a teacher that you know and love, I want to invite you to take a deep breath and to think about this for 30 seconds. Why teach? Why be a teacher today? Thank you so much. I want to invite you to bring what came to mind into your listening for what follows. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. My goal tonight is not to answer every single possible question we could have about AI and education. There are dozens upon dozens of applications that are being explored. And it's really going to take educational communities a while, I think a long while, to discern how to best use or not use these applications and to adjust to this new social situation. So what we need most now and what we can do tonight is to get ourselves as oriented as possible about the general types of uses that are being proposed, and then to get oriented about what is most at stake for us as Catholics or as educators here. So here are the 3 steps. So first, I want to outline what I see as the main motives driving various types of AI education applications. And my purpose here won't simply be to list these. I want to go deeper. I want to help us to get some clarity on the kind of the presuppositions behind these motivations and hopes, and also to raise some important questions about those presuppositions. Secondly, I want to propose an alternative way to come at this whole set of problems that I rarely see in conversations, but which I think would help Catholics to bring their best to the challenges at hand. And then lastly, I want to talk about 3 key themes that I think we definitely have to address, and we have to address well, to be able to say that any particular use of AI in education is a wise choice. So first, let's talk about the main motivations for AI in education and what these motivations presuppose. The first of these, sufficiency. I think this is hands down the most common reason people explore educational AI uses. For a lot of people, AI promises teachers, administrators, and students dozens of ways to save time, energy, money. For example, if AI can help teachers to generate lesson plans or to help them come up with remedial assignments for a student who is struggling and to do it in very little time, well, maybe the valuable capacities of that teacher as a human educator can be redirected towards more fruitful uses. And then the institution overall might be able to educate more people at a lower cost. Now, when I get into conversations about AI and education, I hear a lot of people not take this kind of thinking very seriously. But look, friends, the church's commitment to educating the least among us requires us to use our resources wisely. So although many efficiency-driven uses of AI in education are indeed a problem, we also can't simply ignore these possibilities. Similar possibilities show up in educational institutions in what you might call para-educational settings. For example, a university might explore how to smooth out the problem solving related to financial aid packages, especially those that involve public funds. Okay. Other universities are already exploring grant writing, uses of AI, and that sort of thing. There's a whole list of things that can be explored here. The central question with any of these AI-driven efficiencies is whether they're truly in service to what education should really be about. And for us in Catholic education, right, we want to keep asking the question, is this really aligned with like a Catholic view of what education really is and what the world needs from the church? We're going to come back to this point later. Okay, the second main motivation for AI in education, you could call this the less drudgery, more creativity argument. The idea here is that AI might be able to save teachers and students from busy work, and in that way free them to put their time and efforts into the kinds of activities that matter most. So maybe instead of slogging through hours of grading, teachers could focus their attention on students or support creative collaborative learning experiences. Students might justify using large language models like ChatGPT for creating paper outlines in a similar way. So they might say, let the machine handle the prep work so that I can focus on implementing that outline with creativity and critical thinking. We'll come back to this too a little later. The third motivation we might call individualized learning. So instead of teaching the same lesson to a whole group of students at the same pace, couldn't teachers use AI to take each student through a unique experience tailored to their strengths and weaknesses? Many such options already exist. Khan Academy courses have really put this whole argument front and center, especially. Now, many people call this sort of thing personalized learning, but I think this language is misleading. It sort of suggests that an educator is personally given to and invested in tailoring the student's experience, or it could also suggest that the tailoring is somehow suited to that student as a whole person. But neither of these are really happening here. All we're really doing is tailoring the learning of a specific skill to the student's current abilities with that skill. So I think it's better to talk about individualized learning than personalized learning. Number 4, we have the hope of enhancing access or equitability in learning. So the goal here is to broaden the net of people who have ready access to certain kinds of learning, either by lowering costs or by using AI to level the playing field for students who would otherwise struggle to participate. Besides offering free AI courses, another example here might be using translation applications to help students participate fully when they're still mastering, say, the English language, or when they have some kind of verbal disability. We could also think about language learning apps like Duolingo here. Now notice, and this is, we're going to come back to this as well, but notice how the best examples of this sort of thing tend to be for learning specific skills that could be acquired in serial fashion, meaning that first you do this and then you do that, etc. Number 5, we could use AI in an analytical way to get a better sense of where our students are at. And this is a kind of older use of AI that could be used to kind of bet, are there ways we can gather data to see where our students are struggling, whether inside the classroom or outside? Number 6, AI could be used to explore reality in new ways. Now, that's not just like an educational use, but it could have an educational value. We can train AI to respond to and display features of the world that our senses can't easily notice. When we do this well, this could stimulate new questions or create the possibility for scientific advances or new forms of artistic creation. Famous examples include advances in protein folding, for example. Now, obviously, it's possible to do this sort of thing in a classroom in ways that will be really superficial or which simply repeat biases that are in the data set. But I think at least in principle, this seems to me an avenue that educational institutions could explore responsibly in fruitful ways, although it might not necessarily save educators much time. And then lastly, we could talk about using AI in education precisely to prepare students for an AI society. Certainly at one level, many people worry about students having skills that employers are going to want, right? So that puts pressure on educational institutions to train students in AI use. But I think at a deeper level, we can also talk about exposing students to AI so that they can develop, express, or act upon their own critical judgments about the meaning of these technologies or what it would mean for them to use them in truly fruitful ways. So in number 7 here, I mean, I think we also feel a lot of pressure, and a lot of people articulate this hope that education can be part of, preparing people for using AI well. So at least as I see it, these 7 are, I think, the main hopes behind education tools, AI education tools. So let's kind of begin thinking here. What would it mean to seek these hopes well? Or what would it mean to relate responsibly to those hopes? That's kind of the set of questions I want us to keep asking. For the rest of this talk, I want to give us helpful points of orientation. The first thing we'll do is to talk about some common mistakes to avoid. Number 2, I want to think about how to approach the challenge with the most fruitful attitude. And then lastly, again, I want to help us keep our eye on the prize when it comes to a robust Catholic view of education. So first, I think we need to equip ourselves to not fall prey to a number of fallacies that show up really often, at least in my experience, when people talk about AI in education. Whatever we say about these questions, we've got to make sure we need to find ways to avoid what I think are the following 3 mistakes. This kind of stuff comes up all the time when people talk about these questions. The first pitfall I will call the floating head fallacy. So this is the idea that we can let machines handle the grunt work without this really affecting our ability to do the high-level intellectual work. In other words, let the bot do the outlining, the grading, the initial research, the drafting of initial pieces of a project, and so on. And, the hope is that this will supposedly free us to be even more fruitful in the far more interesting or rewarding or more human work that we associate with interpretation, creativity, or critical judgment. There's a problem with this way of thinking. And we could put it in terms of how essentially like lower level tasks, things that we associate with like the basic stuff, the beginner stuff, the grunt work. Well, a lot of the high level kinds of thinking almost always cannot be acquired without the grunt work, at least if we do the grunt work with the right attitude. So just for a couple of examples, with music, scales and other drills regularly teach musicians things like focused attention. They teach them disciplined bodily movements. And they also instill what you might say is like a sort of deep embodied awareness of the full range of possibilities that their instruments have, or even the range of possibilities in the music itself. So simply skipping a lot of these exercises can really can get in the way of your ability as a musician to like deeply enter into the possibilities of your instrument. Similarly, we could say that, doing the hard grunt work of outlining your own essay trains you not only to formulate more complicated written compositions, it also trains you to better understand the structure, and also you could say like the possibilities of your own thoughts, and also the structure and possibilities of somebody else's writing. Like our ability to really get deeply into another person's writing is something we're actually strengthening all the time by slogging through the process of outlining a paper well. So that's the first fallacy, the floating head fallacy. The second one is related to this, and we could call it the improvement through exposure fallacy. This one says that letting students use a tool in the ways that they want to use it, or the ways in which tech companies tell them to use it, will sort of naturally and organically prepare the students to use that tool in like a truly fruitful service to the common good. Now, this could happen sometimes. The point is that it doesn't always happen. So, for example, many people want to say that we want students to learn how to judge between good and bad uses of AI text generation. We say that they need these skills out in the world, and I agree. But if this really is the goal, the most reasonable way to get there might be to actually not use AI in writing instruction for a very long time, precisely so that students can develop the skills that will actually empower them to judge well between good versus bad AI text. In other words, preparing students for an AI world could just as easily be an argument for not using AI in the classroom, except in really limited contexts. It really could go either way. And so the point of naming this fallacy is simply to make sure that we actually think this through, right? Sometimes we go from initial use to fruitful use in a sort of natural curve, or other times it's more like leaving and coming home again, right? Where we have to deny ourselves the use in order to get to where we can really use it well. The last fallacy would be the idea that learning is always a serial mastery of tasks. Or in other words, that learning is nothing else than mastering one task and then building on that, mastery to master another task and then another, etc. This is an idea that we get from behaviorist psychology, especially B.F. Skinner. This is how behaviorists saw all learning during Skinner's time. Now, this is sometimes true. Some kinds of learning actually do work this way. And here is where AI tutors might really have a chance of doing some real good. For example, Khan Academy math classes. Although I would also love to hear from actual math teachers how well this is working out. But the key problem here is when it comes to other kinds of learning. Some of the most important learning doesn't work in this sort of serial mastery of skills way. Instead, it involves basically learning to make, you might call, synthetic insights, where we connect multiple parts or examples in a meaningful way. I understand that in an earlier webinar, Dr. Noreen Hersfeld argued that ChatGPT focuses on procedural skills and it's less helpful for conceptual understanding. And this is the point that I'm building on right now. A lot of learning is not a serial learning of skills. It's more about insights that draw together a lot of things at a new level of understanding in a meaningful way. And I think and doing this requires training students in really active thought processes that we don't want them outsourcing to machines. Okay. Next, so those are the three fallacies I wanna warn us about. Next up, I want to say a little bit about, you could call this like the posture that we could bring to questions about AI and education. over and beyond what I hope other webinars are already helping us see when it comes to a Catholic view on technology more broadly. Here, I'm talking about specific postures that people bring when it comes to AI and education specifically. In my own experience, 9 times out of 10, when I hear people thinking about education and AI, I usually run into like two attitudes that I think can help somewhat, but I also find a little bit limiting. The first of these we might call the first line responder attitude. So this one says, wow, our school, our learning institution was like already facing all of these other problems. How can we use AI to help us take care of those other problems, to fix this leak, put out that fire, stop the bleeding here? Okay. The idea here is to rush to find out how AI can help us create some breathing space in our institutions that were already struggling for all kinds of other reasons. The second attitude here, we might call the defense attitude. This one says, wow, AI threatens such and such aspect of education that I really treasure and which I think is central to what education is about. I need to make sure to keep AI out of my classroom because it'll corrupt what really matters when it comes to learning. So here we focus on protecting something that we treasure from being corrupted by AI. Now, I really don't want to be misunderstood here. I think that depending on the context, the right response might look very similar to one of these two postures. I don't mean to belittle either response. And I would actually make a plea that we never ostracize or write off teachers who take the defense posture specifically. They are almost always onto something important when they do this. That said, I do want to invite us to reframe what's happening from what I would think is a more proactive, integrative, and evangelical perspective. Both of the two postures we're looking at here, they let the crisis as it hits us in the face here and now set the terms for our process of discernment. So they let the problem happen to us. Whereas I think a much better approach, what I want to call evangelical creativity, would do us a lot of good and would put things in a better perspective. And this would involve first figuring out what deep needs our age is putting before the church in our educational institutions, right? Discern what the world really needs right now. And then ask how we can develop our educational practices in our institutions in service to those concerns. And only then circling back to the question about how or where or to what degree AI use can fit well in education. I think that this shift in posture from the first two to this last one, you can include the first two to some degree in the last one, right? But it requires you to kind of slow down and also, again, to think a little bit more proactively and really to engage in the process of discernment more fully. This allows the church to bring its best to the table, because what we're doing is essentially asking, like what evangelical opportunities are being created by the advent of AI. So, for example, in an AI society, how will people yearn for the face of Christ in that world? What needs will people have? What in our tradition will be best to retrieve and develop in order to meet those needs? What special service can our educational institutions make here in that world, in that broken and wounded world? So in other words, we don't really know how AI fits well into education until we begin to know what it means for education to serve and anticipate the kingdom of God in the 21st century. So that's what I mean by the evangelical creativity posture. Okay, here we're shifting into the third and the last part of my talk. What I want to do lastly is to talk about three themes that I think we need to keep front and center in our ongoing shared discernment as we embark on this evangelical creativity approach. I think these are important both because they are going to require us to keep thinking together as a church, but also because I can't imagine AI being a good idea in education unless it truly helps us with each of the following challenges. In other words, like if these are sort of like Luis Vera's interpretation of like what it would mean for AI to clear the bar when it comes to education. Okay, the first of these, integral human development. This is, if you're familiar with Catholic social teaching, especially the work of Paul VI in Populorum Progressio, you'll be familiar with this idea. And it shows up not only in Catholic social teaching, but also in the way that the church has been speaking about education for a while. Again and again, church documents on education stress the importance of educating the whole person in service to each person's search for the true and the good. And more recently, Pope Leo has been especially insistent on this point. So here we have a quote from him this past October. This was an apostolic letter in celebration of Gravissimum Educationis from the Second Vatican Council. And here in this section, we see Leo doing what he actually does quite often is to kind of really bring the language of integral development or different ways of speaking about it to talk about what education should be like. Okay. I don't want to go through this whole quote word by word, but I do want to expose us to it. Notice how serious he is about pedagogy kind of clearing this bar. And notice too how he's contrasting this with what he calls a mercantilist approach, or a way of seeing a student simply as somebody in whom we want to inculcate skills. Okay. Each student is a face, a story, a vocation. One interesting thing about recent church documents on education and AI is the way that they don't just simply end up eliciting a retrieval of integral human development discourse, but they actually like inspire like new language for it. And here you see Leo doing this. Leo has also stressed repeatedly the importance of integral human development as a key benchmark for a good enough reflection on any uses of AI. So a little earlier this year, in June, he said the following, no longer speaking simply about education, but this is an early example of Pope Leo XIV indicating how much he cares about this topic. And he's already like focusing specifically on integral development as like a key principle that we've got to make sure we serve really well, or we're simply never going to be learning how to develop AI in service to the common good. I think that reflection on this idea, integral human development as a kind of bar to meet when it comes to AI and education, we could take this in dozens of really important ways. I want to just focus on one here. Right. So we live at a time, I think, where it's really important for Catholic schools to find fresh and effective ways to strengthen how they communicate to students that their lives have great worth, regardless of their future contribution to the GDP or to their future employability, which is not to say that that doesn't matter, right? But we're in a moment where it matters more than anything that we go far deeper than this, and that we communicate this to students in a profoundly effective, fruitful way. We've got to get it across to them that their formation has immense significance, whether or not it makes them money or security. Economic security can be a good, but each student simply flourishing to their fullest loving wisdom and freedom that's a good enough reason for lots of people making big sacrifices for each child's education, right? So the idea that like education is worth the sacrifice of the student and of the student's loved ones, simply because it helps that person flourish. If we can't find a way to not simply restate this, but to state it in new and even better ways right now, I think that Catholic education is in deep trouble. Why does this matter now more than ever? Well, so on the one hand, like it's just never been harder to make the case that education is for something other than job prep. But on the other hand, AI sort of converges with that problem because it focuses our attention persistently on the extrinsic products we make and away from the human process of creation or the intrinsic goods that give those creative activities really deep worth. So teachers, especially in college, we see this in writing already. ChatGPT tempts students more and more, not simply to cheat, but to see the whole business of writing simply as the production of a commodity, right? The point simply is to please the customer with the product, right? The product is the thing that is, sent in, and the customer is the teacher. And so if it's written well, like who cares how it was produced? But this is just to say that students are really unclear right now about how developing and sharpening their own thoughts is worth the sacrifice at all. So let's just kind of pause and notice that. Our students are alienated from the meaning of developing their intellectual capacities. This has obviously been a problem before, but we've got to appreciate how that problem is kind of becoming steeper and steeper, and it cuts directly at whether or not we are serving the deep humanity of our students. But again, let's not miss the evangelical opportunity here, friends. This also means that our educational communities have a really unique chance to proclaim what it means for our students to have dignity and to have the kind of dignity that is infinitely deeper than their economic productivity. One way to send a clear message about this would be to prioritize any students who are marginalized. Especially if we want to proclaim human dignity, we've got to start there. But notice how using AI to maybe increase access, right? We might think that that's like a way that we can use AI to serve at the education of those who are marginalized or historically underserved, etc. But actually using AI in these particular moments might actually be really counterproductive. Or at least it might be, depending on how we conceive of the church's service to the poor. So if we want to serve the least among us in the way that God does, that means that we have to put the poor first. This is simply what the preferential option for the poor means, right? God puts the poor first, not last, and so should we. But if you really think about this and you let it and you sit with this, it leads you to really awkward questions about our schools. What does it say when the structure of Catholic education in this country is still largely, but maybe hopefully, thankfully not completely, but largely set up in order to give the best we have to those who are well off, and then offers a secondhand experience to the poor? Or what would it say when we give AI tutors to the poor, but then continue to give human tutors to the well-off? Because at some level, we recognize that even if the AI tutor is okay, the human one is even better, right? So that's essentially us continuing to reserve what's best for those who are already well-off. And that goes directly in the opposite direction that the preferential option goes, which is another way of saying that we're moving in the exact opposite direction that the love of God moves. So if the poor suffer from long-term educational inequities, maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe they're the ones who should first get human tutors rather than the bots. Okay. Moving on. Okay. So the second orienting theme, the second bar that I think we really have to clear has to do with the importance of discerning as best we can what the 21st century is likely to be, or what it's likely to feel like to live in that world, and what it will mean to serve the common good in that context, and then what skills are necessary for that. So it's true, we want our students to develop skills for the world they're going into. But we've got to formulate the question in the best way possible. What skills will empower them to actually serve others? It's not always the same question as what skills will help them to get a job. Now let's think about this. So try to fast forward in your own imagination. What happens in a culture after 10 years or maybe 20 years where AI has been around for a long time? And for example, text or video is potentially bot generated, right? This is already true. You already can go on YouTube and half the videos that you see when you look up a video about something already look bot generated, and they're not very good. But what happens after 10 years of that, plus whatever other developments we see? Certain kinds of cultural production clearly will not count as much, right? In a world where any video is potentially fake. What kinds of human activity will count, right? Because those will be realms not only where it'll be easier to get a job, but also where we're going to have a better chance of serving the common good, because those kinds of activities will then become the currency that really matters when it comes to how we build our society. So here are some candidates that I at least have come up with, although I would invite everybody here to ask this question for themselves. Number one, oral presentation, extemporaneous presentation, any kind of oral engagement, and the skills needed to be fruitful in that setting, I think are going to be really important. Okay. I could be wrong here, right? But we can't pass on the task of making risky predictions on this and trying to do this best we can. Another one that has been put forward, for example, by the sociologist Alison Pugh in her book, The Last Human Job, is the work of interpersonal attunement or connection, which on the one hand is actually really important for how many people do their jobs, but it has value at way deeper levels than simply being effective at your job. We can pause and ask, right? What is it? How can education prepare students to really shine there? What would it mean for the liberal arts to continue developing? They've always been developing. So how can they continue developing in a way that would really empower human flourishing in a world where these skills are an even bigger deal than they are now? How can Catholic education specifically really shine here? And also we should say, how can an educational experience prepare students to value these activities like interpersonal attunements, to value them for their intrinsic worth and not simply because of their potential commercial value? One of the arguments that Alison Pugh makes is that just as interpersonal attunement is going to become more important, we're also going to see more pressure from employers to maximize the profitability of this, which might actually come at odds with the real reasons people do this at work, right? The intrinsic reasons people do this at work. And so this too is something that our students might need a lot of help from us in. One more skill that we might need to put special attention on, number 3 here, is personal judgment. So we are now constantly told that machines can judge better than we can. And we also know now, right, that our digital apps are constantly nudging and influencing our personal judgments, so many of our on-the-spot decisions and how we interpret this or that. So it very well could be that we're entering a time when really making a responsible judgment and really owning and standing by that judgment about anything. And to do this responsibly, but also with an openness that you could be wrong, right? In other words, robust but fallible personal judgment. It could be that this is going to become even more of an achievement than it already was in the past. It was already hard, right, to reach maturation as a human in your ability to do this, but now it's about to become even more challenging. What can schools do to prioritize the maturation of personal judgment in their students in an AI society? This is something we should think about. Okay, lastly, the last theme that I think we have to address well to use AI in education well has to do with labor, preparing our students for the question of labor really well. So we know already that sorry, I lost my place here. We know already, right? This is not news to anybody that AI is putting pressure. How much is unclear, but it's putting pressure on our job market. And it's also causing us to begin asking deeper questions about the meaning of good work or just work. I think it certainly would be nice if schools could be places where students at any level of their development are being empowered to pose and to ask these questions fruitfully, and also to maybe wrestle with some of the best ways in which humanity has answered those questions. Again, questions about the meaning of work, of good work, just work. Here, there are many things we should be focusing on here, but I can't pass on the chance to recommend that we revisit John Paul II's Laborem Exercens, especially with the way that it develops an argument that work has intrinsic value precisely because a person is doing it in pursuit of flourishing in truth and goodness, right? Because the work we do is part of that journey. Work has a deeper value than the things that it creates. And so much of that document is John Paul II sort of unpacking this. And I would really encourage us to kind of revisit this and see what we can do with it. But actually, beyond this, the biggest point that I would like to make on this theme actually has to do with teachers as workers. I only recently realized I am myself a teacher, and it only hit me very recently that, of all the laborers in society, teachers are the ones that students interact with the most, right? Teachers are workers. And as workers, they're one of the workers that students see more than anyone else. That means that the way our lives embody an answer to the question about work, to the meaning of work, the way we embody those answers is likely to have a really big impact on how our students come to think about work. So how do teachers comport themselves when it comes to the fact that their work involves hard labor? What kind of example are we setting for our students here? Again, and it's a question that matters, right? The question of labor is about to be huge. The church needs to get this right. Maybe you can see where this is going, right? This leads to more specific questions. What message about labor, about its value or its lack of value, are we sending our students when we use this or that AI application? What message especially are we sending them or embodying for them if we begin to use AI for every type of work that we consider boring or basic? Well, that depends. I mean, that might matter or it might not matter, right? But then it leads to another question. Is there an intrinsic value to those activities? Or is there only intrinsic value in like the more high level, exciting, creative activities that we don't want to outsource to the machine? What about the teacher-student relationship? Is there a reason to think that there's something irreplaceable here? What about it is irreplaceable? Here would be an interesting statement on exactly this point from a document about AI that was published last January jointly by two Vatican offices. Okay? This is Antiqua et Nova, the most comprehensive treatment on AI from the church yet. And in paragraph 79, they go directly at this question about the teacher-student relationship and make a strong case that this is indispensable. And notice how the indispensability is connected with what it means to cultivate, honor, affirm, to help grow the student's desire to grow and learn, and the student's self-awareness as having dignity and potential, which is another way of saying that there's some important connection between the teacher-student relationship and how teachers can help students discover themselves as being made in God's image, which is inherently connected with their infinite wonder for the truth, right? So the stakes here are pretty high, and we got to think about this really carefully. I'm sure more could be said about the teacher-student relationship, but I wanted to at least expose us to what's being said in official church documents about this so far. I want to close with something a little more provocative along these same lines. So to circle back to something I mentioned a lot earlier, one of the things that teachers hate the most is grading. I'm a teacher. I hate grading. It's so painful. So predictably, many teachers are, even if they don't like to admit this, a lot of teachers are really feeling the pull to explore AI as a way to liberate themselves from the despair-inducing drudgery that grading sometimes can feel like. But maybe this is exactly the time to think more deeply about what is really happening when a human being grades student work. And I don't mean to say that the status of grading or grades is in a great shape today. Grading can be also a problem because it gets in the way of intrinsic desire to learn, etc. But that being said, let's just focus for a second on like the practice of grading. Does it have any intrinsic worth? Okay. Can it be appreciated as a human activity? Can we think about it even as a kind of spiritual practice? Almost like the teacher's equivalent to washing another person's feet. It might be soul-crushing sometimes, but it is also an act of loving attention to another person's imperfect and not always well-intentioned attempts to learn something. Even if the student doesn't read my comments carefully, there is still an act of love in grading that work fairly and in doing one's best to respond to the student in a way that will inspire growth, right? The very desire to give a student feedback in a way the student can actually receive and operationalize, that expresses that same love that's already being expressed in the sacrifice of grading. None of this is to say that every minute spent on grading is a wise choice or that, again, that the way we do it at whatever institution we're in is going particularly well. But it is to kind of invite ourselves to rediscover aspects of what we do as teachers, the labor of teaching, that might have a kind of thicker sense of themselves as practices than we might have realized before. At least, right, we would need to count that cost well before we think about what should be outsourced to the machine and what should not be. At a time when many teachers complain that students don't want to think for themselves, it's at least worth thinking deeply about the value of how teachers think for themselves about their students. Again, what we do as teachers models for them an attitude to work, and work is one of the biggest questions their generation is going to face. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really eager to hear what questions you have.
I see the questions in the box already, so let me begin by looking at them. We'll start with this one. Do people who are currently studying for an education degree to teach required to include AI in their learning curriculum? to be able to correctly educate their future students with AI. Are current board certified teachers required to update their academic credentials to be better educated to teach about and with AI? How can we expect students to do the right thing if teachers uneducated about doing the right thing? So, I mean, that's simple enough. Who's really, are teachers required to know what they're doing about AI?
My sense of this is not comprehensive. Um, uh, so this I'm sure would depend on how each state is doing certification for teaching and how that then sets the terms for how things are done elsewhere by private institutions in that same state. Um, but if what I know locally is any indication, my best guess is that currently we're at a moment where if you're studying to be a teacher, you are going to feel pressure to be developing a responsible position on these things. And more than anything, like the skills to implement AI tools in your classroom. You will I cannot imagine how college students in education classes right now aren't being encouraged to experiment with AI tools, having conversations with their mentor teachers and their advisors on this. So in that soft way, it's becoming part of their apprenticeship and their curriculum. Um, I would be surprised to find that certification standards have already stated this clearly, but I could be wrong here. And the reason I'm a little bit reticent is because my sense is that colleges in general um, are struggling to figure out how to even begin asking these questions, right? And so an education department or an education school might be already on its way to some answer to the question that this person posed. Um, but I would guess that most universities that train teachers or any institution that trains teachers is still largely up in the air about how to best go about this. Um, in part because so many of the deeper questions at stake um, are it requires to go back to the drawing board so much um, in the face of deep economic pressures that students and their parents bring. Um, but I think also to whatever degree I think it's just going to take a while, and maybe it should take a while because if the advent of AI is comparable to the printing press in terms of like a pivotal shift in the media that support human culture, um, we should expect that over time, this is going to lead to really big changes in how education is done, what it means, how does one prepare for it. Um, I think it will be good for the liberal arts to continue developing in the face of this. And most educational institutions, they're not really set up for quickly pivoting in the face of changes that are that deep, right? And so fully implementing an answer to the questioner's interest here would, beyond simply saying, hey, we want to incorporate a class where this happens and so on. I think it's already happening at one level, but like a full institutionalized answer will take some time.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Does the structure of our educational system need to change in order to accommodate the opportunities that AI offers and to minimize the dangers? So does the structure of our educational system need to change to accommodate opportunities, minimize dangers? And if so, how does that structure need to change?
Oof. Um, I don't think I have a complete answer to that, but let me identify two pressure points where I think I will be especially interested in getting these two right. The first goes back to what I said about the preferential option. So if we're going to adjust or pivot into an AI society and its needs, right? Again, what does it mean? to bring the face of Christ to that society. We have to ask hard questions about what it would mean to not give the poor and marginalized, or anybody that we would consider on that broad spectrum, kind of like a second best education. Or another mistake that is often made is we assume that all they need is like skills for getting a job and attain economic advancement. Rather, like they need our best possible proposal for holistic liberal arts learning. And ensuring that we do, like, this is already a mistake we make all the time in educational institutions. We hardly ever get this right. But it's high time to begin getting it right, because if we don't, it's about like the church's ability to proclaim the gospel through its educational institutions would get far worse as AI continues to exercise certain kinds of pressure, because otherwise we will do the standard default thing, which is to use AI to give everyone except the most well-off students a subpar package, when we know that there's a better one that we're going to reserve for the ones who really pay up. So that will be one thing that I would love to see us get right. There was another one. Oh my goodness, I'm struggling to remember. Okay. This is the other one where like institutional change, I think, will be necessary, and it will be a tall order, but this will be an important task. I mentioned earlier of the three fallacies, right? The second one was the improvement through exposure fallacy, right? It would be so much more convenient if we could say that people will be able to use AI in like creative ways, deeply creative ways, just by exposure and tinkering. But if that's not true, right? If there are lots of default common uses that actually prevent you from acquiring the skills you need to use AI in deeply creative ways that really serve society, well, the educational institutions have to ask hard questions about how to set up what you might call like a sufficiently ascetical environment where it's like genuinely possible for students to support each other and be supported by their institution in the whole business of not using it. Right now, we're just not set up for this. We're too interested in thinking of students as a customer that we have to keep happy. And that really shortchanges our ability to ask something deep from them, right? So educational institutions would have to adjust their rhetoric and their structure in order to really make a proposal to students. We're asking you to do something really hard. We're asking you to engage in a profound set of forms of non-use. And you're going to hate it. But here's why it's going to be immensely good for you. And it'll actually empower you to engage in exactly the kinds of views that really matter. Right now, it's immensely difficult for individual teachers to make this kind of pitch to their students. And notice, this is not like a Luddite pitch, right? The whole point here is to empower good use. But it's the sort of thing that it's not likely to go well unless like entire institutions support it in a comprehensive way.
Okay. Here's first a comment and then a question. My wife is a teacher, and I love and appreciate the way you describe grading as an act of love. Thank you. I think a big challenge for teachers is that given the pressures they face, they themselves use AI, et cetera, to prepare lessons. But he says, I don't know if it's a he, I guess a he. Finally, my key takeaway from tonight is your focus on discernment and the development of personal agency as something that AI cannot replace. Can you say a little bit more about that?
The personal agency and personal judgment, I think, is where maybe this person was
Right.
going.
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments. So to that last point, recently in a conversation among some friends here at where I teach at Mount St. Mary's University, a good friend and colleague made the point that even though it's actually we at Mount St. Mary's, we love the fact that even though this is a liberal arts institution, we still have majors. And the purpose of majors isn't simply to get the students a job, although it often does help with that. There's a deeper human formation aspect to this, because in the process of focusing and acquiring specific mastery, like getting expertise in like a specific thing, right? Maybe it's education, maybe it's accounting, it could be all kinds of stuff, right? You develop a direct experience of what it means to know something really well, which also teaches you like how much you don't know about all kinds of stuff, right? Um, so I think a lot more could be said here. If you're really interested in this question, I co-wrote an article with Paul Schurz. You're going to meet Paul Schurz a little later. And if you look up an article from the two of us in the Journal of Religious Ethics, we have all kinds of stuff to say about this. But I think the short answer would be like the more we can find ways to put students in situations where they get directly involved in developing a skill that calls forward the making of judgment, where they are learning from others when they get stuff wrong, when they're being constantly challenged, when there's a good feedback loop between their actions and like learning that they got it wrong, right? Often this means getting yourself deeply involved in the world or in a community.
Mhm.
These are forms of exposure to expertise that not only train you in better judgment, but they teach you what good judgment looks like, so that you can then begin to generalize from that and ask yourself, okay, like what would it mean for me to have good enough judgment when it comes to like scientific publications about disease online, right? Or other kinds of things. And then you learn how to respect that distance. But you also learn how to stand behind the judgments that you do make, because now you have a sense of how much they cost, right? So that will be at least one thing to say here. The more we learn, the more we can be consciously aware of how we learn, and especially how we come to make good judgments, the more we can respect our own boundaries, but also respect how much we actually can make good judgments within those boundaries, right? And that leads to this ability to make a judgment and to stand by it.
Mhm. Thank you, Lise. I think we have time for one more. Someone maybe who's a teacher made this comment. I think AI in the context of formal education has removed many tasks that took a lot of time. Now we can focus on tasks that were neglected. Personal human development can now take a prominent place. Comment.
There may be instances where I think this could be like the case. I suppose my general answer to this is to suggest that we take the opportunity to look more deeply than ever at those tasks that we want to outsource. It may be, and this is what my example of grading was meant to model, right? It may be that those tasks had deeper sets of goods than we initially realized. Just like what I just did with majors, right? We often talk about majors simply as in college, right? As a way of preparing to get a job or serve the common good. But it turns out that there are these other things that they do when it comes to our overall integral human formation, right? And so in a sense, it's actually really hard to comment on this sort of in general, because we wouldn't really know, right? Whether it's a good idea to outsource that thing that we spend a lot of time on. Like we're not ready to make a judgment about the trade-off until we have a full sense of what we're about to jettison. I guess this is a really Chesterton thing to say, right? Don't get rid of something until you really understand it. And one thing that I'm learning, and I find this to be a humbling experience, I did not originally set out to be an AI theologian. Like this is not a topic that I thought I would be writing and talking about 10 years ago. But thinking about it, and especially when it comes to education, has prompted me to have those moments of discovery. I used to think that grading is just drudgery, and I would have loved, or I used to think that it would have been something that I would love to get rid of in my life. And it's only in the face of these questions, the set of questions that AI poses to us, that I find myself changing my mind. and realizing, wow, okay, these features, these things that I would used to take for granted as features of my teacher life, um, serve a more complex set of goods than I realized, right? And so the first order of business is just to get to run up a full account in our heads of what it is that we might be getting rid of. And then the other question would be related to what I called the floating head fallacy earlier, right? Um, for example, let's circle back to grading. What if one of the ways in which I give myself to grading as an act of love is actually has actually been helping me all along, to be really good with students when they come to me for discussions in office hours, or even more importantly, when they come to me with a complaint about a grade or something about the class, right? Um, that's a question I should be asking myself, like what, how is my ability to do this other thing that I would love to do by outsourcing the first task to AI? Is there a way in which my ability to do that well is actually depending upon what I have been calling the drudgery of my work? Um, I would at least want to make sure that if I do outsource the first task, in this case grading, to the machine, that I come up with a plan, right, for how else I'm going to cultivate those skills from here on out. And even more importantly, how are we going to train new teachers in those same basic human skills after we say grading is no longer something teachers do, right? Because I've been teaching long enough that maybe I could get away with um, continuing with those skills that I already have if I get rid of the drudge work that initially helped me to attain it. But that's not the same as for somebody who is only now learning how to be a teacher. So I don't mean this as a cover for, like, I don't actually mean to say no every single time, right? I simply am trying to name what questions would we need to answer well in order to do what the questioner is saying responsibly. Um, we don't want to saw off the branch we're sitting on,
Yeah.
habitually speaking.
Thanks,
Right.
Louise. That's great. Louise, we're getting to the end of our time. One person made a comment that I think might be worth everyone listening to as we conclude tonight. And the person said this: evangelical creativity as a posture in a Catholic school would require nothing short of a paradigm shift. You just used the word pivot, but this would be a cultural revolution of a sort. And I think that's something that we all have to think about as we end tonight. Grateful to you for this wonderful presentation and all the things that you, I think, forced on us to think about, as especially in the context of Catholic education. So thank you so much, Luis. I appreciate it. To everyone who joined us tonight, please join us again. I think it would be on January 14th that Dr. Paul Schurz from Notre Dame University will be joining us to deal with AI and ethical questions, especially as they impact healthcare. So thank you, one and all. And if you'd like to, and from Spirit Alive and all of us who work at Spirit Alive and the Sisters of St. Joseph, a very Merry Christmas to all of you. And may God's peace really come to reign on our earth. Thank you and good night. Good night, Luis.
Good night.